Today we're going to review the little torpedo kegs that you can get from MoreBeer.com. You're probably thinking, this is a winemaking channel, why are we talking about kegs? Well, I find kegs to be also pretty useful in winemaking, and of course you can use them to make a sparkling style wine, a sparkling style cider, but you can also use them with unconventional gas. So normally a keg you would pressurize with CO2 to carbonate the wine and to serve the wine, or of course beer, but it's going to result in absorbed CO2, so a carbonated wine. But you can of course also get additional nitrogen regulator, which you can use on either a nitrogen or an argon tank and have the ultimate, which is wine on tap. So you always think, man, I wish I didn't have to open a bottle of wine every time I wanted a glass. Well, if you do have a nitrogen regulator and a kegging system, you can have wine on tap, and it's not going to be carbonated wine. It's going to be nice, flat, still wine. So that's a really beautiful thing in my mind. But the standard kegs that you would buy are these 5-gallon standard Cornelius kegs. So these are like from Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They use these forever. And they are great things for home brewers, but I personally don't necessarily want to keg an entire carboy of wine. I want to keg a little bit of wine, and I also want to bottle wine so I can give that away. So that's why I chose this 2.5-gallon little baby corny keg system that I can take to a party. I can take it if I go on a vacation, and you can just have, whether it be sparkling wine, which here I've got a sparkling Concord that we just made, and this actually just won an award in a wine competition. Or of course, like I said, with the additional nitrogen regulator, it can be a still wine, and you can probably make a lot more friends by doing that. But I'll go through this little setup and just tell you everything that I've learned about it in the week that I've owned this thing and been kind of playing with it and putting it through its own tests. So one thing I've noticed that I really like is it does use a standard lid, so you can be sure that seals will be available for it if you use it a lot and you want to replace the seals on it. It uses ball locks. So there's two types of fittings for these types of kegs. So there's ball lock and there's pin lock. Ball lock, I believe, is the Pepsi style, and pin lock is the Coke style. Really, both would be totally adequate. Ball lock, it just kind of, you lift it and it's got these little ball bearings and you can push it down. It's really simple. And the ball lock you can mount in any orientation versus the pin lock, you put it on and you turn it about 45 degrees to lock it down. And personally, I don't think it's going to make or break your life, whichever one of those you have, but whatever one you do have, you are going to want to stick with it because you're going to just get a handful of those fittings. You're not going to want to have to mix and match. And for the most part, you can switch the fittings out in these kegs. They're pretty universal. The other thing about the ball lock kegs, and I do think this is a small advantage, but they have this keychain ring style pressure relief valve. So if you want to burp the keg, so kind of purge that oxygen out as you're filling it, you just pull up on this and you can burp the keg. You don't have to stick a pen in it or anything like you would have to do with the pin lock kegs. And again, not going to make or break your life here, but that's maybe one reason if you're a salesman for ball locks, you might say you should get the ball locks. I'm not going to try to steer you either way, but like I said, the torpedo kegs, that's just what they come with. One other thing about these little kegs, you can tell they've put a little bit of thought into making these. So these are stackable. So you could get 1.5 gallon, 2.5 gallon, or 5 gallon. And I could envision a situation where I've got two 2.5 gallons or three 1.5 gallons and a nice little stack of 3 of my top go-to wines. So that could get you through a really long time and just always have that wine on tap, which is just a beautiful thing. With this kit, that I got, it's pretty much the full-blown starter kit. So it comes with every single thing you need to rock and roll. If you're gonna force carbonate a wine, if you're gonna keg a wine, and if you wanna get your party started. So it comes with the tank, the CO2 tank. Of course, the tank's not filled, and it never will be if they're gonna ship it. So you do have to find some place to fill your CO2 tank. Any place that sells compressed gas. In Pittsburgh, there's a place called Butler Gas. Every city will have some place like this where you can get your keg filled. And a lot of actually, brewing supply places might even have a place that they can fill your CO2. And if they don't do it there, they'll sure be able to tell you where to. It comes with a tap right regulator. So something that's really important when you buy a kit like this is that it has to have a dual gauge regulator. So it's not exactly like a welding regulator that has a tank pressure and a flow meter. A beverage regulator is going to have a tank pressure and then a keg pressure, because you really want to be able to control the pressure in that keg. You don't care as much about the flow rate. It does have this shut-off valve, which is really nice to shut the pressure off, and then of course your standard big shut-off valve here. The quality seems to be really, really good on it. I've kind of tried to push the limits of the regulator, and I've heard from some really poorly made regulators that sometimes you'll have foaming issues because the regulator isn't fast enough. It doesn't, instantaneously react when you push on that tap handle, so it might surge pressure. Well, I couldn't make the dial on this one wiggle at all. When you push the tap handle, seems like it keeps perfectly right up. So I think that's really a good thing. The tank here, it's an aluminum tank. So this is more of your beverage style tank versus like an industrial style tank, which is good, of course, because you're dealing with beverages here. It comes with a picnic tap. So I'm sure you've seen these. These are just the taps that you might get on a keg if you bought a full keg of beer. It's good for going places. Like I said, if you're going to go somewhere, this is probably the setup you're going to take. And you think, when I had this, I thought maybe this is more hose than I need just for around the house. But as it turns out, it's actually really important with a simple picnic tap like this to have a decent amount of hose. So this is, let's say about 4.5 feet of hose. And it's 3/16 inside diameter. So it's got a lot of pressure drop. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to set that keg at a pressure of somewhere between 8 and 12 PSI and fill your glass of wine without blasting wine out, because by the time that wine gets to the whole other end of this hose, it's really, the pressure is kind of dropped down to, I can't say for sure, but maybe something like 4 or 5 PSI, and it's not spraying out like if you were to cut that off and cut it really, really short. If you were to use this in something like a kegerator, I would probably consider grabbing a tap handle that actually has a flow control on it, and that'll really, really help with your foaming. But what I found with this is as long as you keep everything cold, so let's say you put this on ice, the keg on ice, just kind of coil up the tube on top of the ice too, and when you pour from that keg, make sure to lift it relatively high so you don't have like an air or a CO2 trap in here, and that'll help to really reduce the amount of foam that you're going to get from that keg. The build quality on this keg, I would say it's right on par with any of these Coca-Cola or Pepsi kegs. I personally think it looks a lot cooler, so it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Said it's got pretty much just standard quality parts here. It's got a nice thick rubber seal, and I've not experienced any leaks or anything with it. It seems like these pin style valves here really shut off really nicely. If you run the keg fully dry, it completely sucked every last little bit of wine out there. So I thought that was really nice. You're not really wasting anything when you're finishing up your wine here. As far as value goes, I'd say these are a really good value for a new keg, and of course a new tank and a new regulator. You're really gonna have a hard time piecing together a new system for a better price than this. Now, of course, you can scavenge the used market and you can save a little bit of money for sure. So this particular setup with the 2.5 gallon is about $240. And if you were to, piece together a bunch of used stuff, you could probably save $75 or so. But it is kind of nice to have it all as a one-stop. If you're new to this stuff, you don't really have to piece everything together. So I think that is a good value. Now, if you were to buy all of these individual components that come with the keg, you're really actually not going to save that much money from when I've priced it out. You're going to spend, if it's about $240 all at once, it would be about $245 or $250 if you had to buy everything separate. So if you do go to MoreBeer, you could go to their website, and if you think, I want to get, instead of a 5-pound CO2 tank, I want to get a 10-pound. Well, you can do that. You can kind of piece it together, and you're not really going to be losing out a ton by doing that. And like I said, I'll put a link to the kit in the description, and maybe I'll put a link to the kegs by themselves as well, and if you want to check them out. As an overall, though, if I were to go through some numbers, I know people like numbers, right? So if I was going to rate the build quality of this keg, I would score it at about a 9 out of 10. I think it's really, really good. And to get anything better than this, you're probably going to have to pay. It's nice and relatively heavy gauge stainless steel. It's 304 stainless. For functionality or performance, I would give it a 10 out of 10 there. Function was flawless. Like I said, I've not had any issues with it. Actually, if I was going to say one little thing, it's just that these picnic taps can be a little finicky. You really have to know how to use them. You got to keep them cold. You got to hold them up versus like a flow controlled tap if you were going to put this in a kegerator or something. And as for value, I would give the value probably about an 8 out of 10, because like I said, I don't think that you necessarily have to buy this as a full kit with CO2 tank, with picnic tap, with regulator. You could piece together the system if you kind of know what you're looking at. And like I said, if you wanted to switch out one or two things, like for instance, these are the plastic connectors. These are about $5 each, and I think for $10 you can upgrade to stainless steel connectors. There's little things like that you can do. And like I said, also, you might find that you might have an opportunity to buy like a used CO2 tank, which is going to save you a decent little bit of money. But keep in mind, when you buy a used CO2 tank, these are all tested. So every so many years, it might be 10 years, these have to be pressure tested. So when you buy a brand new tank, it's nice because you don't have to have it tested for quite a while. So I think overall, it's a really awesome kit, and you're going to see this a lot more on my wine channel. So what I'm going to be doing in the near future is I'm going to be making another sparkling wine, and what I'm going to do is a sparkling Malbec style rosé. And of course, the inevitable, I'll eventually be doing some wine on tap that's not carbonated. So stay tuned for those videos. If you haven't seen my website, smartwinemaking.com, be sure to check that out. And if you have not yet subscribed, click the little subscribe button and click the bell if you'd like to be notified for new videos. Thanks for watching.